Thanks, Wade. Appreciate it. And thanks for giving us the quick sneak peek at some of the takeaways and findings. We've been hosting a variety of smaller focus groups to have folks digest some of that data. It's been really interesting to hear some of the reasons. What we always say with this type of data, it is sentiment data. And that doesn't mean that we know the answers to why folks are thinking one way or the other, or that perceptions are changing. That's what we'll be doing at the event, is we'll be trying to tease some of that out. That's what we'll be doing in some of our future coverage. That's why we love doing the survey, because it gives us a whole bunch of threads for us to pull on so that we can learn and understand, and then see how we can make strategies as a community to help improve some of those areas. So thanks again, Wade. And if you're interested in learning more about some of that data, we're going to be doing that at the October 22nd event. All right. I'd like to introduce you to today's moderator for our panel, Mike Mendenhall. He's our associate editor here at the Business Record. He's got a great program featuring 4 fantastic panelists from across the state. He's going to introduce each of them and begin the panel. Mike, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending. Today, for our final virtual Envision Think Tank of 2024, we are very excited to have 4 panelists here involved in transportation, economic development, and education, and who all think about and implement infrastructure as one piece of their broader goals for Iowa's growth. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we'll dive right in for questions. So with us today, we have Stu Anderson. He's a Transportation Development Division Director for the Iowa Department of Transportation. Stu graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from Iowa State in 1991, and he's worked for Iowa DOT ever since. In his current role at DOT, Stu is responsible for multimodal transportation planning, programming, and project development activities. Stu, thank you so much for being with us. Next, we have Jeff Davidson, the Executive Director of the Jasper County Economic Development Corporation. That's the Jasper County's economic development agency. Jeff has served in that role since 2019. Prior to that, Jeff was the Jasper County Hometown Pride Community Coach from 2014 through 2019. And he previously served as the director of the Iowa City Department of Planning and Community Development from 2007 to 2013, and the director of Iowa City Metropolitan Planning Organization from 1990 to 2007. So Jeff, thank you for being with us. Also on today's panel, we have Katie Shawver. She is the airport manager for Knoxville Municipal Airport, which she's led since 2022. Katie is also a professional pilot flying for corporate companies and for the U.S. military in a civilian capacity. She moved to Iowa from Las Vegas with her husband, Kyle, who grew up near Knoxville. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today, too. And then rounding out the panel and pulling a double shift today is Jay Byers. He was introduced earlier by Chris. So Jay, thanks for sticking around for the panel. All right, so we'll just go ahead and get started and dive right in. So this first question is going to be for the full panel. We'll start with Stu. What's the biggest infrastructure opportunity or challenge right now for your organization, Stu, and for the community that you serve?
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me be part of this panel. I'll begin with a challenge. This probably isn't surprising, but funding, and in particular, the inflationary impacts on our funding, our buying power, is really the biggest challenge we're seeing here at the department, and I think across all transportation sectors and modes. Of course, we're all very familiar with the rapid inflation we saw over the last couple of years. Transportation was not immune to that. Just speaking on the highway side alone, if you look at the fuel tax increase that was passed here in Iowa back in 2015, if you look at the impact on buying power due to those inflationary increases, we've really lost all the buying power we gained now with that fuel tax increase. Again, we've seen that across all modes of transportation. The cost of transit vehicles has increased dramatically. So transit agencies, which have an aging fleet across the state, aren't able to replace as many vehicles as they were in the past. Of course, we are pleased that inflation has very much moderated. Our lettings here at the department have gone really well the last 12 months. But of course, those costs are at the same high levels they were at, but at least they aren't increasing anymore. Opportunity, of course, kind of the obvious opportunity for transportation in Iowa is we do have an extensive multimodal transportation system that provides great access and mobility, a real reliable system, and provides low-cost transportation for our goods, which gives us a great advantage in the state. But maybe the opportunity I want to highlight is a little softer opportunity. And I think one thing that is underappreciated in the state is the great collaboration we have amongst transportation stakeholders. DOT works very closely with our city and county partners, very closely with our metropolitan and regional planning organizations, our 35 public transit agencies in the state, the private railroads, freight shippers, providers, other stakeholders, which is really important to make sure we're making the right decisions with those limited funds. And maybe more importantly, at the state level, we have a long history of partnering with our state agencies. And in particular, we've really focused on our partnership with the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Transportation plays a really important role in the state's economy. It's probably also an underappreciated role or taken for granted. But we meet regularly with leadership from IEDA to make sure that we're aware of the opportunities that exist in the state, and we're at the table in identifying the transportation improvements we need to land those opportunities, and just more generally, what we should be focusing on to support a system that supports our economic growth.
Thanks, Stu. I appreciate that. And moving over to Jeff, same question. What are the biggest infrastructure opportunities and challenges that you're seeing at your organization in Jasper County and in the community that you serve?
Thank you, Mike, for the opportunity to be on the panel. Really appreciate it. In terms of challenges, certainly the competitive environment that we find ourselves in terms of business development and the infrastructure questions that are associated with that, that competition is more intense than ever. The notion that's out there now that in the the internet-based world that you can live anywhere and work at a job. You don't necessarily have to be on site somewhere. Well, some of that translates also to primary business development as well. And it makes the environment more and more intense and more competitive. And we have to put ourselves in a position where, we can be competitive. And I think certainly in central Iowa, we can do that. But that is something that is just becoming more and more of a challenge. And we need to be able to respond nimbly. We need to be able to have our team together in terms of state level working with lower level. And I would concur with Stu that it is better now for local government to work with state level. Obviously, in my position, I work very closely with Iowa DOT and IEDA. And in the 30 years I've been in the profession, it has never been a better relationship than it is right now. Kudos to state government for really trying to make that relationship better, because it just helps us in creating that environment where we can compete certainly nationally. In terms of opportunities, we also have those. And in terms of infrastructure, both our private and municipal infrastructure elements are very competitive in terms of rates when you look at things nationally. The South maybe has a little bit a better competitive aspect there, but I think in terms of the national landscape, we are very competitive in terms of our rates for both public and private infrastructure. The other thing we have, and Jay alluded to it earlier in his comments, is just what central Iowa is, that you have the urban environment, a growing metropolitan area with Des Moines that is, a lot of people refer to it as the best kept secret, and in a way it is. But certainly being able to promote that you can be in an urban environment here in Iowa, but yet have all of the things that we all treasure about Iowa. And certainly for those of us in the peripheral counties around Polk County, what we're trying to sell is our adjacency, that if you want to have us more of a small town lifestyle, be in a smaller school district, you can do that. And again, credit to Iowa DOT. They have made the transportation infrastructure connections between us surrounding counties and the metro excellent. And we certainly use those in our marketing and in our attempt to attract primary industry.
Thanks, Jeff. Katie, over to you. What's the biggest infrastructure opportunity or challenge that you're seeing within the municipal airport space, and maybe in the corporate airport space as well, and for the community that you serve in Knoxville?
Thanks, Mike. So in terms of infrastructure, I would say like modernization and expansion. I mean, particularly in Des Moines, you'll see the many projects that are being kind of brought to light from a terminal aspect. They're bringing, security enhancements, modernization to the terminal, more gates that allow more aircraft to be parked, which allows more destinations for the public. But it also, from economic growth, in 2019, there was over 2.2 million passengers that passed through the Des Moines airport and through Iowa airport systems, to also include 142 million pounds of cargo. That's important because most people don't realize the different aspects that pertain to airports. On a smaller scale, in Knoxville, infrastructure could include longer runways, expansion of runways that would allow more businesses to come to small rural communities. For instance, in Knoxville, we are limited by runway length. We have 4,000 feet, which would limit aircraft size that can land in Knoxville, which could prohibit businesses from coming in. But from a job creation standpoint, airports employ tons of people. Their projects bring support other companies and have direct and indirect impacts on the communities that they serve. Some challenges, obviously, just kind of outside that we spoke of, is funding and regulatory issues. We're funded by federal, state, and user fees, as well as on a local level as well. And so kind of, to touch on what Stu was mentioning, our buying power has reduced. And so that would change the scope of our project. So if we have a project that is a runway resurfacing, for instance, we would either have to delay a project till we could accommodate the budget, or not do the project at all. And so we're kind of faced with those challenges as far as funding is concerned, and inflation has certainly impacted those. And of course, regulatory issues could delay a project as well.
Katie, thank you for that. Jay, same question to you. You touched on a little bit in your keynote and your answers, but can kind of expand on some of those biggest infrastructure opportunities that you're seeing in Simpson and Indianola, and challenges that your institution faces in the community down there.
Sure, thanks. Well, I'll just mention 3 projects that would have significant impact for us here at Simpson and Indianola. One, which Katie had mentioned, is the airport expansion project, the new terminal. We're only 15 miles from the airport, but that's huge for not only us, but the entire region, and gives the airport significantly more capacity. So we're super excited about that project moving forward. There's been an effort to rename the Southern Beltway, or make the Southern Beltway part of the interstate system. That would be huge for Warren County, and to get that completed. And I know that we've been working closely with the state legislature and our congressional delegation and the Iowa DOT on that. But that would be a significant lift for all of Warren County. And then one that I think I'm super excited about as well, because I'm a biker as well, is there's a new connection that will be open soon, connecting the Somerset Trail to Easter Lake, which will now enable those of us in Warren County to connect to the entire almost 900 miles of bike trail right now. So I think those are 3 really exciting projects that we'd like to get across the finish line.
Yeah, I kind of want to stick with you. You mentioned the Highway 65, Highway 5 kind of conversion, to go to an interstate. My next question it kind of revolves around where Iowa should be investing its infrastructure dollars, and kind of what effect that has on business climate. But particularly for that project, can you talk a little bit about that kind of investment, what it would take, and kind of what some of the challenges are to get that project moving forward?
Well, it's really not a financial issue. It's more of a regulatory issue. There's some exceptions that would have to be made to the interstate system. Stu might be able to sort of jump into what some of those details are. But if economic developers are looking at a map and they see a 4-lane highway versus an interstate, it has a significant impact in terms of making site selection decisions. And so the research will show that. And so while it doesn't, directly go through Indianola, going through northern Warren County would have a significant impact on Norwalk, Carlisle, Des Moines, and the eastern side of Polk County as well too. So, and which would have a big impact for us as well too, here across the entire county. So Stu might have some additional insights on that.
Okay, great. Well, let's go to Stu then. Stu, maybe if you could elaborate on what Jay said there, but then also to talk a little bit about where else Iowa should be investing its infrastructure dollars, and if you have thoughts even beyond transportation, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. To build on Jay's discussion about the bypass being designated as an interstate. Of course, as people who have driven on that bypass know, it pretty much looks like an interstate. It really is built to interstate standards. There's a few exceptions there. So there's probably some cost associated with a conversion to an interstate, but pretty minimal, and that's certainly not a constraint. As Jay said, the issues are more in regulations and law. There's a state provision regarding minimum speed limits, and then a federal provision regarding vehicle weights that if it was converted to an interstate without addressing those, it would have secondary impacts that would be very significant impacts on the ability for movement of agricultural products and goods in that area. So a lot of the focus on the stakeholders, which I would use as part of those discussions, is working with the state legislature and the congressional delegation to address those changes. And there's a lot of good progress and discussion in that area. So hopefully that's moving forward. From a broader transportation perspective about where we should be investing, of course, as all the panelists have mentioned, funding constraints are a challenge, particularly with lost buying power. So that makes it more important than ever to make sure we're making the right decisions with the funding we do have available. And certainly there are needs across all modes of transportation that we're not able to address as quickly as we'd like, certainly in the Des Moines area. And I see Kevin Foley is listening into, with the Des Moines Airport terminal modernization. That's certainly not happening as quickly as people would like, especially given the huge demand in passenger counts at the Des Moines Airport, and frankly, all of Iowa's passenger commercial service airports. Same challenges across all modes of transportation. On the highway side, we have an extensive transportation system in the state. We have over 114,000 miles of roads, which has been really important to provide access to our ag land to get products to market. And that means we have a lot of infrastructure to maintain. We often hear, unfortunately, headlines about Iowa ranking high in the number of deficient bridges. Of course, most of those are on county road system and very low volume, but those are important roads and bridges to the area. And so a lot of the focus is on maintaining and modernizing the system that exists now. We do definitely want to target expansion projects where we need, and certainly we're doing that at the DOT on corridors like the I-380 corridor between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, and the I-35 corridor between Ankeny and Ames, working our way north there. But a lot of focus on just maintaining and modernizing what we have. Of course, a key part of that is on the safety side. We continue to have far too many fatalities on our public roadway system in the state. As of today, we have 230 fatalities in Iowa. That's significantly better than last year. It's about 40 below where we were last year at this date, but that's still way too high. And so a real focus amongst all owners of the transportation system is what improvements can we make in our infrastructure to improve safety, but then what can we do from an engineering perspective, an education perspective to support that safety issue as well.
Great, thanks, Stu. And then moving over to you, Jeff, on as far as the challenges and the opportunities that we've mentioned so far today, talk about how those you see that impacting business climate, whether that be statewide or in where you're working in rural Iowa, and where do you think we should be investing infrastructure dollars in the state?
Well, it comes down to some pretty cut and dried components, Mike. in terms of when we're working with a particular business prospect and trying to attract them to Central Iowa, specifically to Jasper County. In my case, I don't want to keep showering Iowa DOT with affection, but transportation infrastructure has largely not been an issue for us because Iowa DOT has done such a good job, certainly for those of us in the eastern part of the metro from my county, commuting from the north on 65, 330, the middle of central Iowa is well within it. It's very, very common for us to get business prospects that require a certain adjacency from the interstate system, not a 4-lane highway, but the interstate system. And so that designation is very, very critical. And then we also have Highway 163 from the southern part of our county, enables commuting from Monroe and Prairie City in that area to be very, very, very seamless. So we really appreciate all that. We're fond of telling people if you commute from Jasper County, you'll have the sun at your back, both in the morning and in the evening. So we try and promote that as well. The post-pandemic world has been interesting, obviously, and I think one of the panelists alluded to this earlier, talent, attraction, skilled labor, remains an enormous component of business attraction. But interestingly, in the post-pandemic world, it's starting to change a little bit. What we've noted is that businesses are somewhat begrudgingly, but they are figuring out what they're going to have to do to attract labor to their businesses. That it's not about treating employees the way you used to pre-pandemic. It's about working at remote locations. It's about higher pay. They are finally understanding they are not going to be able to pay the same rates that they did pre-pandemic. And so labor, although still an extremely important issue, is maybe becoming a little less important. And what is emerging in its place, and I've heard this repeatedly from site selectors as well as companies that I've been working with, is that electricity and water are emerging as the two really important infrastructure components. And that, of course, makes it interesting because one is typically publicly provided and one is typically privately provided. But electricity and water are becoming really, really important infrastructure components. I would say they are probably number one and number two right now. And the electricity side of things is interesting because one of the things, I cannot think of a company that has not asked me in their first round of negotiations is the percentage of renewables in electricity, because everybody is trying to get their carbon score down. And so percentage of, and I know the two electric companies I work with, Mid-American and Alliant, are both trying very, very hard to get every year to improve that percentage of renewable energy because it's very, very important location decision for businesses.
Thanks, Jeff. And I wanted to, real quick before we move on, I wanted to touch on one thing you said earlier in your first topic. You're talking about remote work. And I know that a big topic of conversation, both at the federal and state and local levels, has been rural telecommunications, rural broadband. Is that infrastructure issue something that comes up a lot when you're working with companies and trying to attract them to Jasper County?
Yeah, it is, and there's a couple of questions there, Mike. One is there's certainly a base level that's just simply expected. If you're, and we're fortunate in Central Iowa that I'm not aware, in all of the data that the governor's office has put out, and she's obviously made it a priority to get better broadband service in the entire state. But we're generally in Central Iowa in pretty good shape there. Now the question becomes when it's augmented and a really exceptional level of service. It goes back, Mike, to the statements I made earlier about our competitive environment. If we can show that exceptional broadband is available and we're competing with somebody that just has that base level, that puts us competitively in a more favorable position.
Thank you. I want to kind of move on a little bit to talk about energy infrastructure as well as transportation infrastructure. Katie, I'd like to start with you. What role do you think transportation and energy infrastructure are going to play in economic development in Iowa over the next 5 to 10 years, kind of growing Iowa's economy, and how do you see those needs differing between Iowa's urban and rural communities?
Sustainability. I think everyone's focus right now in energy and transportation is sustainability. From a transportation standpoint, we talk about sustainable fuel is a big one. Having solar farms on airports to reduce the carbon footprint that we're producing. And so I think that just for airports that are urban and rural to both be focusing on, continuing the modernization and expansion of those airports in a sustainable way within the guidelines of their funding and, and regulatory issues, I think is important. Aviation is the connectivity of the world, and so I think that it's relative to keep within line of social and cultural guidelines as well.
Thank you. And Jane, moving on to you, same question. What role do you think the transportation and energy infrastructure investment is going to play in the state's economy over the next 5 to 10 years? And do you see that differing between Iowa's rural and urban communities?
I think it's a great question. I think, definitely, one of the initiatives that we worked on at the partnership when I was there sort of post-COVID was really looking at that sort of urban-rural divide in terms of broadband and so forth, and what did we have areas in the region. Indianola, I think, was very much ahead of the curve with IMU here, who's had a very robust internet offering here for many years, but I think that there's definitely those spaces across the state that need to catch up, and I think that the partnership and the governor's office and so forth have been working on that. I think that is important. And I do think sustainability is huge as well too, just in terms of as Jeff had mentioned, but I think that both Mid-American Energy and Alliant have done a good job of really expanding the wind energy, the solar energy, and so forth too. And I think that as we look at what are those other options for baseload moving forward too, as there's a lot of pressure on the coal plants as well too, and and looking at what are those other options moving forward for baseload. And I think water continues to be a big issue too, right? I think that we've been blessed, for the most part in Iowa with having an excellent water supply. But as we're looking at, I think that moving forward, that's going to be even a bigger issue as we see some of the challenges out west and so forth, and our ability to continue to provide water and sustainable energy will be huge in terms of our ability to be able to compete long term on the economic development front.
Great. Stu, let's bring you into this question. Just in regards to transportation and energy infrastructure, how is it going to play over the next 5 to 10 years in Iowa's economic growth?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my opening comments, transportation, of course, has always been very closely linked with economic growth. You have to have the transportation system to provide people mobility and accessibility so they can get to work, get to healthcare, recreation, educational opportunities. And you have to have transportation system to move our products and goods. And so certainly continued investment in transportation is vital to support the state's growth. Now the focus is a little bit different in our rural and urban areas. Of course, we need to move goods and people in both those areas, but certainly in the urban areas, maybe it's a little bit more of a focus on the movement of people, supporting commuters to get access to those jobs, even from the rural areas around our metro areas. People are commuting into the metro areas for jobs. So that means having a really good transportation system, a roadway system that's safe and reliable to get people in, but also having public transit access so people that don't have access to a car can still access employment, healthcare, education, etc. Also meaning having a good system for bicycling and walking. So all those modes are particularly important in our urban areas. In the rural areas, again, maybe a little bit more of a focus on the shipment of goods. So that means continuing to have access to multiple modes of transportation, as has been alluded to A great advantage of Iowa is our low-cost transportation system. And that's because we have access to a great rail system, a navigable river on the Mississippi, and hopefully more navigable river on the Missouri River. Provides great low-cost transportation for export markets, which has been a great advantage. So we need to continue to invest to make sure we retain that access and actually enhance it where we have some opportunities for new developments.
Stu, I wanted to follow up with that and ask you, like, what is when companies are coming to the state of Iowa, like what are you hearing from them is is there a particular mode of transportation that's in high demand that really they're looking for? I mean, to come to relocate to Iowa or expand in Iowa, is there something that they say this is what we have to have?
Yeah, and that certainly varies by development. We do hear rail access is very important, particularly obviously for developments that are going to be shipping goods and products. So we have had several development opportunities where there's been a need to have some access to some funding to build that rail connection or that rail spur into a site. In general, of course, the highway system is very important, and having a reliable system where they know that they have pretty standard transportation times. They know the system's going to be available, even, of course, in Iowa with a state with winters. They want to know that the system's operated well, again, at all levels of government, so that when we have storms, we can clear that roadway quickly. And even from a transit and aviation perspective, again, depending on the type of development, they want to know they have access to access our commercial service airports, to have, as they're going to meetings across the country and the world, they have access to that system. Or for transit, if they need a system to help get workers into a community, public transit through either scheduled service or through van pools is increasingly important from a worker perspective as well.
Great, thanks. Jay, I wanted to move to you. I want to move into conversation about housing. Specifically, affordable housing, both multifamily, single family, rental, and owner occupied. What it really influences a broad swath of Iowa's economy. So can you talk about kind of the current state of housing in Iowa and how it affects your constituencies and your communities? And what solutions are leaders kind of looking to?
Well, I think it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue in all communities across the state. And I think that, if you look at students who are graduating from college now, Generation Z, they're seeing, a lot of challenges, right, in terms of affordability of housing, and of course the interest rates. Good news, yesterday dropped a little bit yesterday as well, which are, have an impact on interest rates for mortgages and so forth too. But I think it's important that that there's a wide range of options, whether that's being rental or more affordable options for buying houses as well too. And I think that there's not a lot of easy solutions, but with the various tax credit programs that are out there in terms of the multi-unit housing units to again, the investments from the developers as well too, and what are those incentives that communities need to do to attract housing. And I know that across the region, there's a number of communities that have been very aggressive with attracting private developers as well too, and sometimes those incentives are needed to build your housing stock. So I think, again, there's a wide range of different strategies out there, but I think that there are definitely initiatives, from whether it's federal level, state level, local level, that can provide those additional incentives to make sure that there's more options, really from starter units to government assisted tax credit programs to just market driven as well too.
Jay, how important is the, increasing that housing stock supply and keeping our college graduates here in Iowa after they finish their education? I know that there's data from the state that shows that we're seeing an increase in college students leaving the state afterward. Is it how big of a component is that in retaining students?
I think overall, just affordability is really important, right? So whether it's affordability for housing, cost of living, which we've always been very competitive, right? And so I think that, how do you make sure that you have affordable cost of living, but at the same time have robust quality of life investments as well? Because people making decisions in terms of where they want to live based off of quality of life as well too. So I think it's you really have to be good at all of that. But definitely affordable housing, of which Iowa competes a lot better than, for example, the coasts. That is actually an advantage for us, but we have to make sure that we're continuing to provide those options for our college graduates.
Jeff, similar question to you, just from affordable housing and just housing supply in general. What's the current state of that you're seeing in the community you serve and in the folks that you talk to throughout the state, and what are some of the solutions that you're seeing crop up in whether it be in Jasper County or in Iowa as a whole?
Well, probably the biggest change, Mike, in the business of economic development in the last 5 or 10 years certainly has been with the world becoming so much more mobile. The old-fashioned 50 years ago model of building a factory and then building housing within a few blocks of the factory for people to be able to walk to work, that model's gone completely. And what we have now is a situation that people can live in a lot of different places and they need access to their employment site. And so going back to my planning background for a minute, placemaking is what I would call it, has become a factor in economic development. How appealing are our communities? Are they good places to live? And as I think a number of the panelists have alluded to, the smaller town lifestyle is really appealing to people. People that grew up in a small town school district would like their kids to go to a small town school district. We have some excellent school districts in Jasper County, and I'm sure in the rest of the metro as well. But if there is not enough housing in a community, that really eliminates all possibility. I mean, sure, you may be able to get a grocery store and some of the other things that people are looking for in terms of an attractive lifestyle, but if you do not have enough housing, that is going to eliminate any possibility of people being able to move there and live there. So the housing question, Mike, is enormous. I wish I had better answers for you. We are scratching and clawing. Those of us in the outlying counties from the metro, of course, have an even larger challenge because the builders have such housing builders have such advantages with scale economies, being able to build within the metro, that to do many fewer houses at a time in an outlying location like Jasper County, it just becomes more and more of a challenge. So what we try and do is we try and find people who are already committed to Jasper County that are builders and then work out programs for them. And certainly there are programs in terms of affordable housing. There are programs to be accessed at the state level. It typically requires some knowledge of those programs they can be pretty overwhelming otherwise sometimes, but we're trying to do everything we can, going to more townhouse and attached units rather than single family homes, and things like that to try and get affordability where it needs to be. But it's an enormous issue and one that is a big factor in economic development right along with infrastructure.
Great, thank you. At the top of the presentation, Jay, talked a lot about education, and I actually had a question specifically for Katie. You did an interview with the BPC's Fearless Initiative in 2022 when you started at the Knoxville Airport, and you said one of your goals was to partner in making pilot training more accessible. You said that the airport was currently working with several student pilots. You wanted to expand that. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that aviation education and how it can contribute to Iowa's growth?
Yes. So I am a huge advocate for education, obviously relative to aviation specifically, but I'm a product of a younger I guess in school. So I was born and raised in Las Vegas. And so they have what they're called magnet programs that are designed to specialize in specific industries. And one of which was an aviation program. And so I was through this program through high school and graduated at 17 years old with a private pilot's license. So I had the unique opportunity to be propelled into a career at a young age that allowed for scholarship opportunities and better career opportunities that have served me now 20 years later. And so I'm such a huge advocate for that. And when my husband and I had the opportunity to take over the Knoxville Airport and to also buy the FBO, which is a fixed base operator, which provides all the services to the airport, which includes a flight school, it was our goal to not just build the flight school out, but it was to create opportunities for kids to work towards their private pilot's license. And generally, these kids don't come from means to do it on their own. And so aviation, unfortunately, is a very expensive industry. And so for a lot of folks, it's unattainable. And so last December, actually, through this initiative that we've financially supported and through the city, we have 2 kids that have gotten their private pilot's license and stuff. And so these programs are designed to allow kids and foster education that'll start their career in aviation. And it's not just to be a pilot, but it's for mechanics and engineering and ATC. And there's so many different fields in aviation that kids may not be aware of. And last year we also hosted an air show that was completely free to the community. But it was to build enthusiasm through aviation. And so everything was there through universities and colleges that would build the gap to not just getting excited about aviation and all industries within aviation, but was to create a path forward of how to achieve them as well. And so I'm excited about the program.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting story and a good segue into our question too about public-private partnerships in the state. And so I wanted to go ahead and maybe go over to Stu and ask him about what the role is. Do you see public-private partnerships playing in the state's infrastructure investments here in the coming years, and how to choose those? How can those partnerships be strengthened? The ones that we currently have.
Yeah, so public-private partnerships, that term can mean a lot of different things in the transportation arena. I think where it's probably most important in Iowa is through those public-private collaborations that I mentioned up front. It's really so important that we engage the private sector as public transportation service providers to really make sure that we're making the best decisions and understanding the issues that the private sector is facing. And again, as I've mentioned up front, we focus a lot on having those discussions, and we do that a lot through the creation of advisory committees and advisory groups. For example, we have a freight advisory council that meets quarterly in Iowa, where we ask for shippers and providers of freight to come to Central Iowa and spend some valuable time of their day with us, sharing the issues they're facing and having a dialogue. We do the same thing with a rail advisory committee. We have a committee for connected and automated vehicles to help us as we prepare for how that's going to change our transportation system. Those groups are really vital and important for us. Of course, by doing that, we're asking the private sector to, again, dedicate some of their valuable time sitting down with us. We work hard to make sure it's valuable for them as well. But I guess one way we can strengthen that is, if you are contacted or have an interest, to take that time to engage in these conversations, because we really do think they're important and help us make the best decisions.
Thanks, Stu. And we have about 1 minute left, but I wanted to get Jeff and Jay's takes too on those public-private partnership roles. So Jeff, we'll start with you.
Yeah, and I'll go quickly, Mike. As I mentioned earlier, when we're working with a specific company on a location decision, time is money for that company. And that's something that I think historically government hasn't understood fully, that a business doesn't want its money tied up doing nothing while it's waiting on an annexation, it's waiting on a zoning, it's waiting for an infrastructure extension. We need to be nimble and we need to be ready to go. And certainly we have great private sector providers that we work with, both in electricity, natural gas, and broadband service, but keeping everyone working together so that we can move forward in a timely manner is just extremely important.
Great. And Jay, on public-private partnerships regarding infrastructure.
Yeah, well, I think I'm a big fan of public-private partnerships. Just kind of from the college perspective, we're looking at different options just for providing student housing with public-private partnerships, and that's been definitely a trend across the country. And we think there could be some great opportunities on that front as well, and maybe partnering with other nonprofits as well. So I think that there's definitely a lot of opportunities to do so, and I think that as we're looking to stretch those public dollars, that looking for those opportunities is really important.
Thank you. Well, 30 minutes goes fast. So Katie, Stu, Jeff, Jay, thank you so much for all your insights today. I know our audience is appreciative, and thank you for spending time with us. And I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to Chris.